They laughed. They actually stood there and laughed while my son was sitting on the ground crying, and they laughed. Those were the words Claire Whitmore spoke through tears, barely able to breathe, sitting alone in a diner at 6 in the morning, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Her son's wheelchair had been destroyed, on purpose, by boys who thought cruelty was funny, and nobody was going to do anything about it, or so they thought. If this story moves you, subscribe, leave a comment with the city you're watching from, and stay until the very end, because what happened next changed everything. They laughed. They actually stood there and laughed while my son was sitting on the ground crying, and they laughed. Those were the words Claire Whitmore spoke through tears, barely able to breathe, sitting alone in a diner at 6 in the morning, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Her son's wheelchair had been destroyed, on purpose, by boys who thought cruelty was funny and nobody was going to do anything about it, or so they thought. If this story moves you, subscribe, leave a comment with the city you're watching from, and stay until the very end, because what happened next changed everything. The wheelchair was already in 3 pieces when Daniel Harper first saw the boy. He almost didn't stop. He'd had a long day, a longer week, and his truck was loaded with 2x4s that needed to be at a job site before sunset. He slowed down at the edge of Ridgeway Park mostly out of habit, the same habit that had kept him alive through 30 years of construction work, the habit of noticing things that didn't look right. And this didn't look right. A boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, was sitting in the grass at the far edge of the park near the chain link fence. Sitting was the wrong word. He was collapsed there the way a person collapses when their legs have given out and there's nothing left to catch them. Around him, scattered like garbage, were the pieces of what used to be a wheelchair. The frame bent, one wheel cracked nearly in half, the armrest separated from the body completely. The boy's face was turned down toward the ground. His shoulders were shaking. Daniel Harper pulled his truck over. He climbed out slowly, the way big men who work with their hands tend to move. Deliberately, without hurry, like the world makes more sense when you don't rush it. He walked across the grass and crouched down a few feet from the boy because he didn't want to startle him. "Hey," he said. The boy looked up. His eyes were red. His cheeks were streaked with tears and dirt from where he'd wiped his face with the back of his hand. He had golden brown hair and a face that was, even in that moment, even destroyed by crying, unmistakably kind. The kind of face that made you think this was a boy who helped people, who thought about other people. "You need some help?" Daniel asked. The boy looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the pieces of his wheelchair scattered around him in the grass, and something in his expression said it all. The question he couldn't quite bring himself to answer, because answering it meant admitting how bad things really were. "I can't get home," the boy said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to get home." Daniel looked at the broken wheelchair. He looked at the boy's legs. He didn't ask questions he didn't need to ask. "What's your name?" he said. "Noah." "I'm Daniel." He reached out his hand and they shook, formal and serious, the way men shake hands. And something about that small gesture, that decision to treat this 10-year-old like a person who deserved to be taken seriously, made Noah's chin tremble all over again. "Where do you live, Noah?" "Maple Court. It's about 8 blocks. "Okay." Daniel stood up. He started gathering the pieces of the wheelchair from the grass, careful with each one, treating them like they mattered even broken. Because they did matter. He could see that even without knowing the whole story. "I'm going to carry you home. Is that all right?" Noah blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." There was a pause. The boy looked at him again, that long, searching look that children give adults when they're trying to figure out whether someone means what they say. "Okay," Noah said quietly. Daniel lifted the boy with the same calm, steady hands he used to carry everything in his life, like this was simply work that needed doing, and he was simply the man here to do it. He settled Noah against his side, gathered the broken wheelchair pieces as best he could, and walked 8 blocks through the quiet afternoon streets of a town that had no idea what had just happened in its park. Neither of them spoke much on the walk. Daniel asked once if Noah was comfortable. Noah said yes. That was about it. When they reached the small house on Maple Court with the faded green shutters and the flower boxes out front that were trying their best despite the dry summer, Daniel carried Noah to the front door and knocked. Claire Whitmore opened it 30 seconds later. She saw her son's face first. Then she saw the man holding him. Then she saw the broken wheelchair. And for one terrible second, she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her hand went to her mouth and she stood there in the doorway with her apron still on from cleaning up after lunch. And she looked at her boy, her 10-year-old son, who she'd had spent the last 7 years protecting from every sharp corner and unkind word in the world. And she saw that he had been crying so long that his eyes had gone swollen. Noah. It came out as barely a word, more like a breath, more like a prayer. "I'm okay, Mom," he said quickly. "I'm okay." But he wasn't, and she knew it, and he knew she knew it. "Ma'am," Daniel said, "my name is Daniel Harper. I found your son at Ridgeway Park." He was sitting alone. Someone broke his chair. A pause. He couldn't get home. Claire stepped forward and took Noah from the man's arms, pulling him to her chest the way mothers do when words aren't enough, when the only language left is holding on. She held him for a long time, her face pressed into his hair, her eyes closed. When she finally pulled back and looked at him, she asked, "What happened?" And Noah told her. It came out slowly at first, the way hard truths always do, a piece here, a piece there, until the whole shape of the thing became clear and undeniable. He had gone to the park the way he did most Tuesdays when school let out early. He liked the north end of the park near the old oak trees because it was quieter there, and he could sketch in his notebook without people bothering him. He had been sitting in his wheelchair with his sketchbook open, drawing a propeller plane he'd been working on for 2 weeks when 3 boys came over. They were older, 15, maybe 16. He didn't know their names. At first, they just stood around him and made comments. The kind that were technically questions. What's wrong with your legs? And can you even walk? But weren't really questions at all. They were performances. They were showing off for each other. Noah had learned to handle those. He kept his eyes on his sketchbook and answered simply and didn't give them anything to work with. Yes, he used a wheelchair. No, he couldn't walk the way they could. Thank you for your curiosity. Please move along. But they didn't move along. One of them, the tallest one, the one who seemed to be the center of the group, the way one particular planet pulls everything else into its orbit, leaned down and picked up Noah's sketchbook without asking, started flipping through it, making comments. The other two laughed at everything he said, which wasn't even that funny, but that was fine because the point wasn't really to be funny. "Hey," Noah said, "that's mine." The tall boy looked at him, smiled, and dropped the sketchbook into the grass, not handing it back, just dropping it, because the dropping was the point. The dropping said, "Your things don't matter. You don't matter." Noah leaned forward to pick it up, and that was when one of the other two grabbed his wheelchair from behind and pulled it back. Just enough that Noah lost balance. He caught himself on the armrest, heart pounding. "Stop," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Stop. Just stop it." The tall boy laughed, a real laugh this time, bright and easy and completely without conscience. "Relax," he said. "We're just playing." "I'm not playing," Noah said. "Give me my chair back." "Your chair." The tall boy repeated it, tilting his head like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all year. He looked at his friends. They looked back at him. And then, in a motion so casual it was almost worse than anger, the tall boy walked to the back of the wheelchair, grabbed the handles, and started walking. Just walking, away from Noah, with his chair. "Hey!" Noah's voice cracked. "Hey, stop, stop!" He tried to push himself up to follow, but his legs didn't work that way, and the grass was uneven, and before he'd made it 2 feet, he was on the ground. On his hands and knees in the park grass, watching 3 boys he'd never done anything to walk away with a thing that connected him to his own life. "Please," he said, and he hated himself a little for saying please, but he said it anyway. "Please just give it back. It's mine. You don't, please." One of the other boys picked up the sketchbook, tore out several pages, let them drift on the wind. The tall boy looked at the wheelchair. Then he did something that still didn't make sense to Noah when he tried to explain it later. Not the cruelty of it, but the casualness. He tilted the chair sideways and shoved it hard into the chain-link fence, metal against metal. The crunch was loud enough that a couple of people on the far side of the park turned to look. Then he did it again. And again, the armrest snapped loose. One of the rear wheels cracked at the frame joint, The tall boy kicked the chair twice for good measure, and then the three of them walked out of the park laughing. Actually laughing, the way people laugh leaving a movie theater. They left Noah on the ground in the grass with his broken chair and his torn pages and the sound of their laughter fading slowly into the afternoon. He sat there for a long time. He tried 3 times to pull himself back into what was left of the chair. It was too damaged to support his weight. The wheel that had cracked wouldn't turn. The frame sagged. He'd stopped trying after the second time because it was making things worse. So he just sat. I wasn't sure how long. Long enough for the sun to move. Long enough for his hands to stop shaking, at least mostly. Long enough to try not to cry and then cry anyway, and then stop caring that he was crying because there was no one around to see. Until Daniel. Claire listened to all of this without speaking. She sat on the couch with Noah beside her, his sketchbook, what was left of it, in her lap, and she listened. Her face stayed very still the whole time. The way faces go still when something inside is moving too fast to let anything out. When Noah finished talking, she asked one question. Did you recognize any of them? Noah shook his head, then he stopped. The big one, the tall one. I heard the others call him Marcus. The name landed quietly in the room. Claire looked at Daniel, who was standing near the door, hat in his hands. Thank you, she said, for bringing him home. Of course, Daniel said. I mean it. Thank you. He nodded once, left his phone number on a notepad by the door in case she needed anything. And then he was gone, his truck pulling away from the curb, his 2x4 still waiting for him at the job site. Claire sat with Noah for another hour, not talking, just present. She helped him get settled, made him a grilled cheese because it was his favorite and because she needed something to do with her hands. She helped him clean up the tear and grass situation on his face. She sat on the edge of his bed and watched him fall asleep, the way she hadn't done since he was very small, just sitting there making sure he was real and whole and still here. And then she went to the kitchen. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She didn't drink and the broken pieces of the wheelchair she'd carried in from the front porch. And she let herself feel everything she hadn't let herself feel in front of her son. She was 36 years old. She had been fighting for Noah since he was 3 when the diagnosis came and rearranged every assumption she'd ever had about the future. She'd fought insurance companies. She'd fought school boards. She'd sat in the waiting rooms for hours and asked doctors hard questions and taken second jobs when the money didn't add up and pushed a stroller modified with more straps and supports than it was ever designed to hold because the right equipment hadn't arrived yet and the world didn't wait. She had fought so many things, but she had never felt quite like this. This specific combination of rage and helplessness and fear that sat in the chest like a stone, because this was different. The insurance companies and school boards and the endless waiting rooms, they were systems, impersonal, bureaucratic. You could navigate systems if you worked hard enough. You could find the right form, the right department, the right word. But this, 3 boys who looked at her son and decided that cruelty was entertainment, that was different. You couldn't file a form against that. You couldn't find the right word for that. You could only sit at your kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night holding a broken wheelchair frame and whisper, I promised him I would always protect him. She said it out loud even though there was no one to hear it. I promised him. Then, I don't know how to do this. She had never said that out loud before in her life. She'd thought it in the dark plenty of times, but she'd never said it. Saying it felt like something tearing. Or maybe, and she would think about this later, maybe it felt like something finally letting go. She put Noah's broken wheelchair by the door so she could take it with her in the morning. Then she went to work. She worked the early shift at the Route 9 roadside, a restaurant that was exactly what it sounded like, a diner on the side of a state highway that had been there longer than most of the town's residents and would probably outlast most of them too. Claire had been working there for 4 years. She knew every regular by name and order. She knew who took their coffee black and who took it sweet and who pretended not to take sugar because their doctor had told them something they weren't ready to hear. She knew which booths were drafty in winter and which window tables got a slant of morning light that made everyone look a little bit better than they felt. She knew this place. She was good at it, and she was exhausted that morning in a way that went past tired and into something more serious. The kind of exhaustion that settles into the bone and makes even your face feel heavy. She poured coffee. She took orders. She smiled at the right moments and refilled without being asked and moved through the morning rush with the automatic competence of someone who'd done this so long, their body knew the steps even when their mind was somewhere else. Her mind was somewhere else. She was calculating. The thing that mothers do that nobody ever talks about, the constant background math of survival. A replacement wheelchair, standard model, would cost at least $2,000, probably more for the kind with the right specifications for Noah. Her insurance covered adaptive equipment, but only after a deductible she hadn't met yet this year. Her savings account had $412 in it. She'd called that morning before her shift and confirmed the number even though she already knew it. $412. And then there was the question of what she was going to do with what Marcus and his friends had done. She had already decided she was going to the police. That was not a question. But she'd been to the police before for smaller things, neighborhood things, and she knew how it worked. She knew that some boys at the park wasn't a lot to go on. She knew that without names and without evidence, the story she could tell was just a story. All she had was the name Marcus and a broken wheelchair. She was refilling coffee at the corner booth when Rebecca Stone walked in. Rebecca came in every Tuesday and Thursday, had for as long as Claire had been working there. She always sat in the same booth by the window, the one with the draft in winter, which didn't seem to bother her. She always ordered the same thing, 2 eggs scrambled, rye toast, black coffee. She always left a $20 tip, which was the kind of generosity that Claire had learned not to be sentimental about because Rebecca clearly didn't do it to be noticed. Rebecca Stone was 52 years old with blonde hair that had gone partially silver at the roots in a way she clearly didn't lose sleep over. She had a face that had lived in it, lines around the eyes, a jaw that suggested opinions, hands that had worked hard for a long time. She wore jeans and boots and a leather vest, always. The Hells Angels patch across the back of the vest was so familiar to Claire by now that she'd stopped clocking it the way you stop clocking the color of a regular's car. "Morning," Rebecca said, sliding into her booth. "Morning." Claire poured her coffee without being asked. Rebecca looked at her, just looked at her the same way she always did, direct and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world to notice things. "You look terrible," Rebecca said. Claire almost laughed. Almost. "Thank you. I mean it in a caring way." "I know you do." There was a pause. Rebecca wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "You want to tell me what happened?" And this was the thing about Rebecca Stone. She didn't ask, "Are you okay?" which was a question most people asked so they could hear yes, fine, and move on. She asked what happened. Present tense, factual, like she was prepared to deal with the actual answer. Claire looked at the other tables. The morning rush was thinning. The couple by the door had their check. The old man at the counter was on his third coffee and reading the sports section. She sat down across from Rebecca. She told her. All of it, the park, the boys, Noah on the ground, the wheelchair in pieces, the name Marcus, the $412, the math that didn't work, the feeling in her chest that had kept her awake most of the night, the whisper in the kitchen at 11 p.m. that had surprised even herself. "I don't know how to do this." Rebecca listened to every word. She did not interrupt. She did not offer the reflexive sounds of sympathy that people make when they're listening on the surface. The "oh no," and "that's awful," that signal you're waiting for the story to end. She just listened, her eyes steady on Claire's face, her coffee untouched. When Claire finished, the restaurant was quiet enough that you could hear the cook scraping the grill in the back. Rebecca said, "Tell me what the boy looked like, the tall one. Marcus?" Claire described what Noah had told her. Tall, maybe 16, dark hair, nice clothes. The way he'd carried himself like someone who expected the world to move for him. Rebecca nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee for the first time, took a sip, set it down. "I want you to do something for me," she said. "What?" "Go home after your shift. Be with your son. Don't go to the police yet." She held up a hand before Claire could object. "I'm not saying don't go. I'm saying not yet. Give me 24 hours. Claire stared at her. "Rebecca, I know you do." Rebecca met her eyes. "Do you trust me?" It was a strange question from someone who was, technically, a customer. But then again, Claire had been talking to Rebecca across this table for 4 years, And she had a sense of people the way you develop when your livelihood depends on reading them correctly. Who is having a bad day? Who needs to be left alone? Who needs someone to fill their cup without being asked? And she trusted Rebecca Stone. She wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the way Rebecca's voice never rose, even when she was clearly angry. Maybe it was the way she left $20 tips without ceremony. Maybe it was just 4 years of Tuesday and Thursday mornings and the particular way she had asked what happened instead of, "Are you okay?" "Yes," Claire said. "Okay." Rebecca nodded once, picked up her menu, which was unusual. She never needed the menu. "Now let me order my eggs before the cook starts cutting corners." Claire stood up. She was halfway to the kitchen when Rebecca's voice reached her. "Claire," she turned. "Your son is not alone," Rebecca said. "I need you to hear that." Claire nodded, went to place the order. She was 3 hours into the rest of her shift before she let herself think about what that meant. And 6 hours later, after she'd gone home and checked on Noah and helped him get through the afternoon and made dinner and sat beside him while he drew. Because he was still drawing, still working on that propeller plane in a new notebook she'd bought him on the way home. And that fact alone made her heart feel something complicated. 6 hours later, she got a phone call. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. "Ms. Whitmore?" The voice was deep, calm, the kind of calm that wasn't achieved. That was just the natural baseline of some people. Usually people who had been through enough that they'd long since stopped needing to perform steadiness. "Yes?" "My name is Victor Hayes. I'm a friend of Rebecca Stone's." A pause. "I was hoping we could talk." Claire stood in her kitchen with the phone pressed against her ear and the broken wheelchair pieces still on the counter where she'd left them. And she said, "Mr. Hayes, I'm listening." The voice on the other end of the line was unhurried. "Rebecca told me about your son," Victor said. "About what happened at the park. About the wheelchair." "Yes. She also told me about the Caldwell boy." Claire went very still. "How do you know it was Marcus Caldwell?" Not a question. 16 years old, Richard Caldwell's youngest son. The Caldwell family has been in this county for 3 generations. Richard Caldwell owns Caldwell Automotive, biggest private employer between here and the county seat. He donates to the Police Benevolent Association every year. His name is on 2 buildings at the high school. A long silence. "Ms. Whitmore," Victor said, "are you still there?" "How did you find out all that in an afternoon?" she said. "People talk when they trust who they're talking to." A pause. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly." "Okay. Do you want justice, or do you want your son to have his life back?" She didn't understand the question at first. "Those are the same thing." "They're not always," Victor said. "Justice takes time, Miss Whitmore. Courts take time. Lawyers take time. And the Caldwell family has had a lot of practice at making time work against people who don't have resources. So I'm asking you which one matters most, because depending on your answer, the next steps look very different." Claire looked at the broken wheelchair on her counter. She thought about Noah in his room, drawing his airplane in his new notebook, and the careful way he hadn't talked about the park once since dinner time, because he was 10 years old and already protecting her from his own pain. She said, "I want my son to have his life back." "Good," said Victor Hayes. "Then let me tell you what's going to happen." She listened. When he was done talking, she sat down. Her hands were not quite steady. She had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Sympathy, maybe. Advice. A suggestion to call a particular lawyer or a particular community organization. Something in the register of, "We'll do what we can." She had not expected what Victor Hayes had just described. She sat in her kitchen for a long time after the call ended. Then she went to Noah's room. He was asleep, sketchbook open on his chest, pencil still in his hand. She took the pencil gently so he wouldn't roll over on it. She tucked his blanket up around his shoulders. She stood there in the doorway, looking at her son in the dark. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, she thought, maybe we're going to be all right. She didn't know why she thought that. She didn't have evidence for it. She had $412 and a broken wheelchair and a powerful man who was already preparing to make her look like a liar. But she thought it anyway. She closed Noah's door softly and went to bed. Outside on Maple Court, the street was quiet. The neighborhood was dark. The houses sat in their ordinary rows the way they always did, giving no sign of what the morning would bring. It was the last ordinary night for a long time. The morning after Victor Hayes called, Claire woke up at 4:53 a.m. and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling for 7 minutes before she admitted to herself that she was not going back to sleep. She got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen sink while the machine ran, and looked at the broken wheelchair. She still hadn't moved from the counter. In the dark, in the quiet, it looked worse than it had the night before. The bent frame, the cracked wheel, the armrest that had been snapped off so cleanly it almost looked deliberate. And it had been deliberate, she reminded herself. That was the part she kept having to remind herself. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't carelessness. Someone had looked at her son's wheelchair and decided to destroy it because they wanted to, because they could, because there was no one around to stop them, and they were certain there would be no consequences. That certainty was the thing that wouldn't let her sleep. She poured her coffee, sat at the table, thought about what Victor Hayes had told her on the phone. He hadn't promised her anything dramatic. He hadn't used big words. He'd simply said, in that steady, unhurried voice, that he knew some people who believed in showing up for families that had no one to show up for them, that he'd made some calls, that she shouldn't be surprised if things started moving faster than the Caldwell family expected. She hadn't known quite what to do with that. She still didn't. What she did know, what she had known from the moment Noah told her the name Marcus, was that Richard Caldwell was going to be a problem. She had lived in this county long enough to know what Richard Caldwell meant. His name was everywhere if you knew to look for it. The sponsorship plaque outside the youth sports complex, the brick with his family name on it at the library entrance, the annual full-page ad in the county newspaper that looked like a news story if you didn't read carefully. Richard Caldwell was the kind of man who bought goodwill the way other people bought insurance, systematically, patiently, so that when something went wrong, he already owned the room. And she was a waitress with $412. She drank her coffee. She sat with that reality for a while without trying to fix it, because sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let something be as bad as it actually is before you decide what to do about it. Then she got up, got dressed, and went to the police. The Ridgeway Police Department was a small building that smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee. The particular combination of a place where people worked long hours and nobody had gotten around to replacing the flooring since 2003. The officer at the front desk was a young man named Garrett, who looked like he was a year out of the academy, if that. He listened to Claire with a notebook open and his pen ready and a face that was trying very hard to communicate professionalism. She told him what happened. All of it. Noah, the park, the 3 boys, the wheelchair destroyed against the fence, the name Marcus. Garrett wrote it all down. He asked clarifying questions. He was polite and thorough, and Claire could tell he was genuinely trying. Then his supervisor walked in. She knew it was his supervisor, by the way. Garrett sat up slightly straighter, and the way the man's presence rearranged the energy in the room without him having to say anything. He was a big man, mid-50s, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now mostly authoritative. His name tag said Lieutenant Briggs. Briggs glanced at the notebook, looked at Claire. "Mr. Whitmore, you said your son was injured?" "His wheelchair was destroyed," Claire said. "He was left on the ground in the park. He couldn't get home. But he wasn't physically injured. No cuts, bruises. He was traumatized. He is 10 years old, and someone took his wheelchair away from him and left him on the ground." Briggs nodded slowly, the kind of nod that wasn't agreement. "And you said the name was Marcus. You have a last name?" She thought about what Victor had told her on the phone, the information he'd laid out so precisely. She looked at Briggs and said, "Caldwell, Marcus Caldwell." Something moved across Briggs's face. Fast, gone before she could name it. He glanced at Garrett and then back at her. "Ms. Whitmore, I want you to understand that we take these reports seriously. We're going to look into this, but without witnesses, without security footage." "There might be security footage," Claire said. "The park has cameras on the east entrance." A pause. "We'll check on that." "Today?" Briggs looked at her steadily. "We'll follow up in a timely manner." Claire looked at him for a long moment, at the notebook in Garrett's hands, at the careful, neutral expression on Briggs's face. She said, "Thank you for your time." She walked out. In the parking lot, she sat in her car with her hands on the steering wheel and breathed. In and out, she knew what that conversation had meant. She had understood it in the pause after the name Caldwell, in the way Briggs had said timely manner, like it was a legal term instead of a promise. She picked up her phone and called the number Victor Hayes had used to reach her the night before. He answered on the second ring. It went the way I thought it would, she said. Tell me, Victor said. She told him. The notebook, the lieutenant, the pause. His name is Briggs? Victor asked. Yes, a brief silence. Okay. What does that mean? It means we proceed the way we planned, Victor said. Claire. First time he'd used her first name. Are you holding together? I'm functioning, she said. That's the best I can offer right now. That's enough. A pause. How's Noah? She looked at the police department building through her windshield. He woke up this morning and asked me if we could go to the library today, like it was a normal Tuesday. What did you tell him? I said yes. She exhaled. We're going to the library. Good, Victor said. Take your son to the library. I'll be in touch. The library trip was both the easiest and hardest 2 hours of that whole terrible week. Noah wanted to find books about aviation history, which was a new fixation connected to the airplane drawings, and watching him navigate the shelves, pulling himself forward, tilting his head to read spines, completely absorbed in the specific, focused joy of a child looking for exactly the right book. Claire stood 3 aisles over and quietly fell apart for about 90 seconds. Then she put herself back together and helped him carry the stack to the checkout desk. On the way home, Noah said, Mom, is the wheelchair going to get fixed? She kept her eyes on the road. We're working on it. How long will it take? I don't know exactly. A little while. He was quiet for a moment. I don't mind the temporary one. I know it's not as good, but it's okay. He was using a loaner chair from the medical supply place she'd called that morning. A basic model, functional but not fitted for him the way his own had been. He didn't complain about it once. Noah, she said. Yeah. You know none of what happened was your fault. A pause. I know. I need to hear you actually know that, not just saying it. He looked out the window for a while. I knew when they came over that something bad was going to happen, he said. I just didn't know how bad, and I kept thinking, maybe if I just didn't react, maybe if I just stayed calm, they'd get bored and leave. Another pause. They didn't get bored. No, they didn't. That's the part that's still weird to me, Noah said, that someone could just not get bored of that, of hurting someone. Claire did not have an answer for that. There were things about human nature she had no good explanation for, and she had decided years ago that the most honest thing she could offer her son was to tell him when she didn't know, instead of inventing an answer that would make her feel better, but him less prepared. I don't know, she said. Some people are like that. I don't have a good explanation. Noah nodded like that was an acceptable answer. Like honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, was still worth more than comfort. I'm still going to finish the plane drawing, he said. Good. It's going to be really good when it's done. I know it is. She drove. He looked out the window. They went home. That evening, Claire got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She answered it. Ms. Whitmore. The voice was male, smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that had been sharpened by decades of professional use. My name is Franklin Doyle. I'm calling on behalf of the Caldwell family. Every nerve in Claire's body went still. I see, she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. I want to be upfront with you, Doyle said. Richard Caldwell is aware that his son was involved in an unfortunate incident at the park involving your child. He's deeply concerned and wants to address this directly. He wants to address it, Claire said. His son destroyed my child's wheelchair and left him on the ground. I understand that's your perspective. That's what happened. And Richard is genuinely troubled by what Marcus has described. However, a slight pause, precise as a scalpel. Marcus's account is somewhat different from what you've reported. Different how? Marcus indicates that your son was distressed before they arrived, that the wheelchair was already damaged when they encountered him, that Marcus and his friends actually stayed briefly to make sure the boy was all right before they left. Claire stood in her kitchen with the phone in her hand and felt something she could only describe afterward as a kind of white-hot clarity. Not rage, exactly. Rage was hot and chaotic. This was cold. This was precise. That is a lie, she said. Ms. Whitmore, Your client's son is lying. My son is 10 years old. He was alone in a park. He was left on the ground. A stranger, a construction worker named Daniel Harper, found him and carried him home. That's documented. That man exists, and he will say exactly what he saw. A pause. Doyle's voice returned cooler than before. We're simply trying to find a resolution that works for everyone. Richard is prepared to be generous. Generous. He understands this has been a difficult situation for your family. He'd like to make a contribution, a significant one, toward your son's medical expenses, as a gesture of goodwill. A contribution, Claire repeated. Yes, on the condition, of course, that this matter stays private, that you withdraw any police report. Stop. Her voice came out so flat that Doyle actually stopped. Stop talking. I am going to tell you one thing. Are you listening? A brief pause. I'm listening. I am not going to withdraw anything. I am not going to take money. And if Richard Caldwell or anyone associated with him contacts me again in this manner, I am going to record every single word. Is that clear? The pause this time was longer. Ms. Whitmore, I want to caution you. I want to caution you, she said. Good night, Mr. Doyle. She hung up. Her hands were shaking. She set the phone down on the counter and gripped the edge of the sink and breathed. In, out. She counted her breaths the way she'd learned to do years ago, when the overwhelm got too close to the surface. 4 counts in, hold. 4 counts out, hold. She did it 3 times. Then she called Victor Hayes. He answered immediately. They called, she said. Victor didn't say already? Or what did they say? He just said, tell me. She told him, word for word, as precisely as she could recall it. The contribution, the condition, the part about Marcus's account being different. When she finished, Victor was quiet for a moment. They moved faster than I expected, he said. There was something in his voice, not surprise exactly, more like assessment. What does that mean? It means they're worried. You don't call and offer money to a waitress at 9 o'clock at night unless you're worried. A pause. Did you record it? No, I didn't think to. If they call again, record it. Every state has one-party consent laws. You can record any call you're a party to. Victor, she paused. What is actually happening right now? On your end, what are you doing? A long silence. Not evasive, more like he was deciding how much to say and in what order. There's a businessman in this county who believes he can buy his way out of anything, Victor said finally. He's done it before. The only thing that stops that kind of man is when the situation becomes bigger than his ability to manage it. And how does it become bigger? People, Victor said simply. That's all, just people. Claire didn't fully understand that yet. She would soon. Get some sleep, Victor told her. And Claire, you did exactly right tonight. Don't second guess it. She went to bed. She did not sleep particularly well, but she slept. The next morning, a call from Franklin Doyle's office came again. This time she was ready. She hit record on her phone before she answered. This time Doyle's tone was different. The warmth was gone. What replaced it wasn't quite a threat. It was more precise than that, more like a preview. I want to be very direct with you, Doyle said. Richard Caldwell has made a goodwill offer. You've declined it. That's your right. But I want you to understand what proceeding down this road looks like. Richard has retained our firm. We have 17 attorneys. We will investigate your son's history. We will interview everyone at that park. We will examine your own record and your financial history. And if there's anything at all that complicates the picture you've presented, it will come out. That's not a threat. That's simply how these cases develop. Claire held the phone steady. She was sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee and her phone on record, and she was very, very calm. Are you finished? She said, a pause. I just want you to understand the landscape. I understand the landscape perfectly, she said. I understand that you've just told a single mother with a disabled child that your firm intends to dig through her personal history because she filed a police report about 3 boys destroying her son's wheelchair. She paused. I have a recording of this call, Mr. Doyle. I want to make sure you know that. Silence. I'd be careful, he said. His voice had gone very quiet. So would I, Claire said. If I were you, goodbye. She ended the call. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were shaking again, worse than the night before. She set the phone on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and sat there for a full minute just breathing. Then she sent the recording to Victor Hayes. His response came back in 11 minutes. Good. That's exactly what we needed. I'm sharing this with some people. Stay close to your phone. She stared at that message for a long time. Some people. She was beginning to understand that when Victor Hayes said some people, he meant something significant. She didn't have long to wait to find out exactly how significant. Later that afternoon, Claire was helping Noah work through his aviation book. He'd found a chapter about early propeller planes that connected almost mystically to the drawing he was still revising. When her phone rang. Not Victor this time, a local number she didn't immediately recognize. She answered. Ms. Whitmore, my name is Teresa Vanek. I'm a reporter at the Ridgway County Gazette. A brief pause. I've received some information about an incident at Ridgway Park involving your son and some minors connected to the Caldwell family. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk. Claire looked at Noah across the table, bent over his book. How did you get my number, she said. A source. Someone who thought this was a story the public should know about. The reporter's voice was careful but direct. I've also received an audio recording of a phone call, one that raises some significant questions about how the Caldwell family has been handling this situation. The recording. Victor had moved fast. Ms. Whitmore, Teresa Vanek said, I want you to know that I'm going to report this story regardless. There are things here that need to be on the record, but I would very much like your side of it. Claire looked at her son. She thought about the offer of money at 9 p.m. She thought about Doyle's voice telling her they would dig through her personal history. She thought about Lieutenant Briggs and his timely manner. She thought about the fact that she had done nothing wrong, that Noah had done nothing wrong, and that someone out there, an entire infrastructure of money and influence, was working right now to make sure the truth never reached enough people to matter. Yes, she said, I'll talk to you. The article ran the next morning on the Gazette's website. It was thorough. Teresa Vanek had done her homework. The incident, the police report, the phone calls, the audio. She'd reached out to Franklin Doyle for comment, and his response, quoted in full, was so lawyer-smooth and indirect that it read as almost more damning than silence would have been. She'd reached out to Richard Caldwell directly. No comment. She'd pulled the park's camera records, and here was the thing, the quiet thunderclap buried in the middle of the article. The camera on the east entrance had recorded 22 minutes of footage from that Tuesday afternoon. Footage that the police had not yet reviewed. The article was shared 1,400 times by noon. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Ridgway County Gazette story had been picked up by 3 regional outlets. By 4 o'clock, Franklin Doyle's office called Claire again. This time, there was no warmth and no threat. Just a voice saying, Mr. Caldwell would like to arrange a conversation directly. That offer expired, Claire said. You had your chance at a quiet conversation. Chose a different approach. We're past that now. She hung up. At 4:45, Noah looked up from his sketchbook and said, Mom, are we going to be okay? She sat down next to him. She put her arm around him. She thought about all the things she could say, all the reassurances, all the versions of course, sweetheart. Everything will be fine that she had ready and had used and knew how to deliver. She said, I think so. I really think so. Because of those people Victor was talking about? She went still. What do you know about Victor? I heard you on the phone last night. I wasn't trying to listen. He shrugged. He sounds like someone who doesn't lie. No, Claire said quietly, he doesn't. Noah went back to his drawing. He was adding a detail to the propeller engine, some small mechanical element he'd found in his aviation book that he wanted to get exactly right. Mom, he said without looking up. Yeah, when all this is over, can we go back to the park? She looked at him, at the careful, focused way he drew, at the hand that held the pencil steady. Yes, she said, absolutely yes. That evening, as the sun was going down and the article was still spreading from screen to screen across the county, Claire's phone lit up with a text from Rebecca Stone. It said, Victor says to tell you tomorrow morning, be home. She texted back, what's happening tomorrow? The reply came back in under a minute. You'll understand when you see it. Claire stood at her kitchen window with her phone in her hand and the last light of the day coming through the glass, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 days. Something that wasn't quite hope. She was too practical for plain hope, but was something adjacent to it. Something that felt like the ground becoming more solid under her feet. She didn't know what was coming. Nobody who hadn't seen it before could have known. But it was coming, and Richard Caldwell, for all his lawyers and all his money and all his years of buying the room before he needed to use it, had absolutely no idea what was about to pull up outside his perfectly managed world. The night settled in. The street was quiet. Claire checked on Noah, found him asleep with his sketchbook on his chest the same way she'd found him the night before, pencil still in hand. She took the pencil, tucked the blanket, stood in the doorway. Somewhere across town, in offices and living rooms, and around tables where power was usually comfortable and secure, the Caldwell machinery was working hard to contain what had started as a Tuesday afternoon at a park. And somewhere else, on phones and in messages, and through a network built not on money but on something older than money, a different kind of machinery was also moving. Claire turned off Noah's light and went to bed. She set her alarm for 6 a.m. She did not need it. At 5:48, she heard the first sound, low and steady and distant at first, then closer, then filling the street, filling the morning, filling everything. The sound of engines, dozens of them. She got out of bed. She didn't grab a robe. She didn't check her hair. She walked straight to the front window in the clothes she'd slept in, an old gray t-shirt and flannel pants, and pulled back the curtain with one hand. She stood there for a long time without moving. The street was full. Not chaotic, not loud the way a crowd is loud when it's angry. The engines had settled into silence now, one by one, each cutting off with a particular finality, like punctuation, like something being stated and then waiting to be read. And what filled the silence that replaced them was something Claire had not expected: stillness. Hundreds of people stood along Maple Court, on both sides of the street, down the block in each direction, some on the sidewalk, some standing beside their bikes. Men and women, young and older. Every one of them wearing the same leather vest she had watched Rebecca Stone wear across a diner booth for 4 years without thinking much about what it meant. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was moving aggressively. Nobody was there to perform anything. They were just standing, present, patient, like they had nowhere else on earth they needed to be this morning and no intention of being anywhere else. Claire's hand was still on the curtain. She became aware, without quite knowing when it had happened, that she was crying. Not falling apart crying, not the kind she'd done at the kitchen table 3 nights ago when Noah was asleep and she'd finally let herself feel how bad things were. This was something quieter, something that surprised her. Tears that arrived before she had made any decision to cry, which meant they were the honest kind, the kind that come from something deeper than the part of you that manages how you look in front of the world. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She breathed. She let the curtain fall back and stood in the middle of her living room for 5 seconds. Then she heard Noah. "Mom?" His voice came from the hallway, still thick with sleep. "What's that sound? I heard engines." She turned around. He was in the doorway in his pajamas, the loaner wheelchair positioned carefully the way he always positioned it when he transferred from bed, exactly where he needed it, not an inch off, because he had learned from years of practice that precision was its own kind of freedom. "Come here," she said. He rolled forward. She stepped aside and held the curtain back so he could see through the window. He was quiet for a very long time. "Are those—" He stopped, started again. "Are those for us?" "Yes," Claire said. Another long silence. "How many?" he whispered. "I don't know, a lot." He looked out the window for a while longer. She watched his face instead of the street, watched the thing that moved across it, slow and complex, the way weather moves across a sky. He was 10 years old, and he had spent the last 3 days trying to understand why someone would deliberately destroy his wheelchair, why the world would allow that, why asking for help seemed to make things worse instead of better. She had watched him process that in his own quiet way, not dramatic, not explosive, just steady and inward, the way he processed most hard things. And now she watched him process this. A knock at the door. Claire straightened. She crossed the room and opened the front door. Rebecca Stone stood on the porch. Behind her, at the foot of the front steps, stood a man Claire had not met in person before, but recognized immediately from his voice. Victor Hayes was 58 years old with a gray beard trimmed close and hands that were large and weathered and calm. He stood the way he talked, like the ground was solid under him, and he knew it, and the knowledge didn't require demonstration. "Morning," Rebecca said simply. "Morning," Claire said. Her voice was not quite steady. Rebecca looked at her face, registered the fact that she'd been crying, and said nothing about it, which was exactly right. "We figured you could use some company," she said. "Hope that's all right." Claire stopped. Tried again. "Yes, it's all right." Victor stepped forward. He extended his hand and Claire shook it. Up close, his eyes were very direct, not hard but precise, the kind of eyes that had seen a lot and developed the ability to sort quickly. "I want you to know something," Victor said. "Everybody out here is here because they chose to be. Nobody was obligated. They heard what happened and they made their own decision. That's how we work." Claire nodded. "And I want you to know something else." He paused. "We've been reading about your family, what you've done for your son, how hard you've worked. Nobody out here thinks you need to be rescued." He said it plainly, without apology, because he was the kind of man who understood the difference between help and condescension. "We're just here to stand beside you. That's all this is." Something shifted in Claire's chest, not broke, shifted, like something locked that had been holding on so long it had forgotten how to release. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, hard, because that was all she could manage. Rebecca said, "Can Noah come out?" Claire turned. Noah was right behind her in the doorway, having navigated the transition from the living room to the front entrance with the quiet competence he always brought to physical spaces. He was looking out at the street with an expression Claire had never quite seen on his face before. Not the focused look he had when he was drawing. Not the patient look he had in waiting rooms and doctors' offices. Something new. Something still being formed. "Noah," Rebecca said. She crouched down slightly so they were closer to eye level. "My name is Rebecca. I've been having breakfast at the same place your mom works for 4 years. She's never once told me how good she is at her job, which means she's probably too modest. But I can tell you the coffee is always perfect, and that's not an accident." She paused. "We all came this morning because what happened to you was wrong. You understand that, right? It was wrong and it wasn't your fault, and a lot of people wanted you to know they know that." Noah looked at her. "How many people?" "Come count them," Rebecca said. He came out onto the porch. What happened in the next moment? The moment when the people gathered on Maple Court saw Noah Whitmore come through his front door. Claire would spend years trying to describe accurately and never quite manage it. There was no cheer, nobody applauded. It wasn't like that. It was something quieter and therefore more powerful. A kind of recognition that moved through the gathered crowd the way a current moves through water. You couldn't see the thing itself, only the effect of it. People straightened slightly. Some nodded. A few raised a hand in greeting, simple and unhurried. And what all of those gestures said collectively, without anyone organizing them, was, "We see you, we're here, you matter." Noah sat on the porch and looked at all of them. Then he lifted his hand and waved. And in the group on the street, 200, 250 people who had ridden from different counties and different towns through the early morning, they waved back. Still quiet, still steady. Victor said, "There's something else." Claire looked at him. "We've arranged for a new wheelchair, custom-built, designed specifically for him. There's a man named Gary Reeves. He's been building adaptive equipment for 30 years. He's the best in the state. He's already started on it." Victor looked at Noah. "It's going to take a few weeks, but it's coming." Noah looked up at Victor. "What kind?" he asked, because he was a boy who understood the importance of specifications. Victor almost smiled. "What kind do you want?" Noah thought about this seriously. "Can it have," he paused, "can it have good wheels, like wheels that can go on gravel? Because the path at the park is gravel in some places, and my old one wasn't great on gravel." "I'll call Gary right now and tell him that," Victor said. "And could it be blue?" "What shade of blue?" Noah considered. "Like the sky when there's no clouds, not dark blue, the bright kind?" "I'll tell him exactly that." Claire pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment. Just a moment. Then she lowered it. 2 hours after Noah came out onto the porch, the activity on Maple Court had evolved from a gathering into something more purposeful. A group of men had gone around to the back of the house with tools they'd brought themselves and began working on something Claire hadn't known was being planned. She could hear the sounds. measured, methodical, the sounds of people who knew what they were doing and were doing it right. She asked Rebecca what was happening. Ramp, Rebecca said. You've got those front steps. The back entrance, too. Gary mentioned that good equipment deserves access, so... Claire stared at her. Who arranged all of this? Victor made some calls. Different people took different pieces. That's how it usually works. Rebecca said it simply, like organizing 100 people with tools and skills and lumber for a stranger's house on 48 hours' notice was a logistical matter rather than an extraordinary act of human kindness. Rebecca, Claire said, yeah. Why, she stopped. You could have told me you were sorry. You could have left money for the chair. Why all of this? Rebecca looked at her steadily for a moment. Then she said, because sorry doesn't build a ramp, and money for a chair doesn't tell your son that people give a damn about him existing in the world. She paused. We can do more than be sorry, so we do more. That was when Claire heard the car. It pulled up at the end of the block. A black sedan, expensive, moving slowly the way cars move when the driver is trying to understand what they're looking at. It stopped at the edge of the gathered crowd and sat there for a moment. Engine running. Then the window went down. Claire couldn't see the face clearly from where she was standing, but Victor could see it. He had turned toward the car the moment it appeared, with the particular attentiveness of a man who had developed a precise sense of when something required his full attention. Who is that? Claire asked. Victor said, Richard Caldwell. The name landed like a stone in still water. Nobody on the street moved aggressively. Nobody shouted. Nobody so much as took a step toward the car. They simply turned. Gradually, the way a field of sunflowers turns toward light. 200 people making no movement toward the seed and simply becoming aware of it at the same time. Simply looking. Richard Caldwell was 54 years old and had not, in recent memory, been in a situation he did not control. He had the kind of money that buys absence of consequence. And he had spent enough years with that kind of money to have largely forgotten that consequences were the default state of the world for most people. He was accustomed to rooms where he was already the most powerful person before he sat down. He was accustomed to problems that resolved themselves when he sent Franklin Doyle to apply the appropriate pressure. I was not accustomed to this. The sedan sat for a long moment, then the window went back up, and then slowly it reversed the way it had come and drove away. Victor watched it go. Is he going to do something? Claire asked. He already did something, Victor said. He came to look. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. A pause. Now he understands. And what does he do now? Victor turned to look at her. That depends on what kind of man he is, he said. We'll find out. The answer came in stages. The first stage came from Teresa Vennick at the Gazette, who called Claire at noon that day to tell her that 2 witnesses had come forward. 2 adults who had been in Ridgeway Park on Tuesday afternoon and had seen Marcus Caldwell and his friends near the chain-link fence. Neither had understood fully what they were witnessing at the time. Both had seen the footage from the park camera, which the police had finally reviewed that morning, 3 days after the report was filed, and both had immediately called the paper. The footage is clear, Teresa said. She was not a person who used words carelessly, which was why Claire heard the weight in the way she said clear. There's no ambiguity about what it shows. Marcus Caldwell and 2 other boys. Your son's wheelchair. The whole sequence. Claire sat down. What happens now? She said. The police have the footage. They have the witnesses. They have an incident report. Teresa paused. What happens now is that this case becomes very difficult for anyone to make disappear. After she hung up, Claire sat at her kitchen table and thought about Franklin Doyle's voice on the phone, the way he had said timely manner, the way he had described 17 attorneys, the way he had said, if there's anything at all that complicates the picture you've presented. Han had made that call before the footage had been reviewed, before the witnesses came forward, before 200 people had stood on Maple Court in the early morning quiet. She wondered if he would make a different call now. He didn't call. His office sent a letter. It arrived that evening by courier, which was itself a statement, the speed of it, the formal specificity of it, and Claire opened it at the kitchen table with Rebecca sitting across from her and Noah in his room working on his airplane drawing. The letter was 2 pages, legal language throughout. But what it said, translated out of that language, was this. The Caldwell family was acknowledging that Marcus and his friends had been present at the park. They were expressing regret for any distress caused by the incident. They were withdrawing all previous claims about Noah's wheelchair being pre-damaged. They were prepared to discuss a settlement that covered the full replacement cost of the wheelchair, Noah's ongoing medical expenses, and an unspecified amount for pain and suffering. They were also prepared to agree to any community service or educational program the court might recommend for the minors involved. What the letter did not contain, not once in 2 full pages, was the word sorry. Claire put it down. Well, Rebecca said. They folded on the facts, Claire said, but there's no apology. Rebecca nodded slowly. What do you want to do? Claire looked at the table for a while. At the surface of it, the water ring stain from years of coffee mugs, the shallow scratch near the edge where Noah had dragged a toy car across it when he was 4. This table had been in 3 apartments before it came to this house. It had held a lot of cups of coffee, a lot of bills, a lot of moments where she'd had to make decisions without anyone to help her make them. I want Marcus Caldwell to stand in a room, she said slowly, with people who use wheelchairs, with people who depend on adaptive equipment for their basic freedom. I want him to spend real time, not an hour, not an afternoon, real time understanding what it means to have that taken away. She paused. I don't know if a letter can make that happen, but I know money can't. Rebecca was looking at her with an expression that was hard to read. Something between respect and something softer. Tell Victor that, Rebecca said. Will it matter? I think it might matter more than you realize. Victor's response, when Rebecca relayed it, was 4 words. I'll make some calls. What happened in the 48 hours that followed was the kind of thing that only becomes clear in retrospect, when you can lay the pieces out in order and see how to the next. At the time, it felt more like being inside something large that was moving around you and through you, and you could feel its direction without being able to see its edges. The regional outlets that had picked up Teresa Vanik's article were now being picked up by larger platforms. The audio recording of Franklin Doyle's second call, where he had described 17 attorneys and the intention to dig through Claire's personal history, had been shared and was circulating with the kind of momentum that made corporate PR people wake up in the middle of the night. Someone had connected the dots between Richard Caldwell's annual donation to the Police Benevolent Association and the speed, or lack thereof, with which the park footage had been reviewed. That connection was now in print, sourced carefully, phrased as a question rather than an accusation, but the question was pointed enough that it didn't need to be stated as a conclusion. Richard Caldwell's name was trending in the county. His company's customer review pages were experiencing unusual traffic. 3 local businesses that had partnership agreements with Caldwell Automotive had put out quiet statements reaffirming their commitment to community values, the kind of statements that don't name anyone, but are nonetheless naming someone. Victor called Claire directly at 9 o'clock that night. How are you holding up? He asked. Tired, she said. But okay, Noah had a good day. He finished the airplane drawing. Good. A pause. I want to tell you something. The people who came this morning, they've been talking among themselves tonight. There's been a collection for Noah's future, medical expenses, education, things you're not thinking about yet but will need eventually. Claire was quiet for a moment. Victor, I can't accept. You can, he said gently but plainly. Not because you're helpless. Because you've been doing everything alone for years and you don't have to anymore. There's a difference, another pause. You know what I've seen in 30 years of this? The people who refuse help because they're too proud cost themselves the most. And their kids pay the price. She didn't say anything. It's not charity, Victor said. It's people deciding that a child who loves drawing airplanes and asks for gravel wheels on his new wheelchair deserves to have people in his corner. That's all it is. She wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. He told you about the airplanes? He told me about the whole drawing, the propeller engine, the detail he got from the library book. A pause and something that was almost warmth moved through Victor's voice. He said he's going to draw a Hell's Angels patch on the plane, for the side, like a nose art. Claire laughed, a real laugh, the sudden surprise kind that arrives before you know it's coming. The kind that feels like something breaking free. He didn't tell me that, she said. He wanted it to be a surprise. She was quiet for a moment. Victor, how do you do this? How do you look at something like what happened and decide it's yours to fix? He was quiet too, briefly. Because somebody has to, he said. And if we don't, who does? The next morning, the second twist arrived. It came in the form of a phone call to Teresa Vanek, not to Claire, from someone who identified himself only as a former employee of Caldwell Automotive. He said he'd been following the story. He said he had information that was relevant. He said he wanted to meet. Teresa called Claire to ask if she wanted to know what the man said before the article ran. Yes, Claire said immediately. She drove to the Gazette offices, a small building downtown that smelled like printer ink and old coffee. The same way newspapers had always smelled, as if the smell was part of the institution. Teresa met her at the door. She was a compact woman in her late 30s with efficient movements and the particular quality of stillness that good reporters develop, the ability to be present without imposing. She walked Claire into her office, closed the door, and sat down across from her. The former employee worked in Caldwell's accounts department, Teresa said. He left the company 18 months ago. He says he left because of something he saw. She opened a folder. 3 years ago, there was another incident involving Marcus Caldwell, a different boy, a different park, different town. The family of the other boy, the boy who was hurt, received a settlement, confidentiality agreement. The whole thing was sealed. Claire stared at her. Marcus Caldwell has done something like this before, she said. We don't have full details because of the confidentiality agreement, Teresa said carefully. But yes, there was a settlement, which means there was an incident, which means this isn't a one-time mistake by a teenager who didn't know better. The room was very quiet. Claire thought about Marcus's face. She hadn't seen it. Noah's description was the only picture she had, the casual ease with which he'd walked away with her son's wheelchair, the laughter, the complete serene certainty that there would be no consequence. That certainty wasn't arrogance. Or it wasn't only arrogance, it was experience. He'd done something like this before and nothing had happened. His father had made it go away. And Marcus had learned, the way children learn from what adults demonstrate, that his actions lived in a world without repercussions. What are you going to do with this? Claire asked. Report it, Teresa said. Carefully, sourced correctly with appropriate legal review. But yes, she paused. I wanted you to know first because... She stopped. Because I think you deserve to know first. Claire looked at the folder on the desk, at the corner of a document visible inside it, at all the careful, sourced, legally reviewed weight of the thing that was about to change the shape of this story. Richard Caldwell has been protecting his son, she said. Not a question. Yes. And in doing that, he made it possible for Marcus to do it again. Teresa looked at her, didn't answer. The answer was in the folder. Claire stood up. Thank you, she said. Ms. Whitmore. Teresa stood too. I want you to know, this is going to get harder before it gets easier. When this article runs, the Caldwell machine is going to react. They'll push back. There will be more lawyers, more pressure. I don't want you to be surprised. I'm not surprised by anything they do anymore, Claire said. She drove home. She parked in front of the house with the new ramp. It had been finished the previous afternoon, built well and solid and right, exactly the kind of work that people do when they want it to last. She sat in the car for a minute and looked at it. That ramp had not existed 5 days ago. 5 days ago, there had been a broken wheelchair on her counter and $412 in her account, and a feeling like the world was arranged specifically to make things hard for people who were already doing their best. 5 days was not very long, and yet, she got out of the car. She went inside. Noah was at the kitchen table with his sketchbook, working on something new. Something different from the airplane, a new page, and when she looked over his shoulder, she saw that it was a motorcycle. Very early stages, just the skeleton of the thing, but unmistakably a motorcycle. Who taught you to draw that? She said. Victor showed me a picture of his, Noah said. I'm going to draw the whole club's bikes, like a series. He said it the way he said most things, calmly, like this was obvious. Like, of course, this was the next logical step. Rebecca said she'd tell me which parts are most important to get right. Claire sat down next to him. Noah, she said. He looked up. There's going to be more stuff happening, she said, with the Caldwell family, with the police. It might get complicated for a while. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm handling it. You don't need to worry about it. He looked at her for a moment with those eyes that always seemed to be processing more than he said. I know, he said. Mom, I know you're handling it. He said it simply, not dismissively, like it was a fact so established it didn't require argument. You always handle it. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know whether to be moved by it or wrecked by it. The weight of you always handle it from a 10-year-old who had apparently organized his understanding of the universe around the assumption of her competence. You could tell me when it's hard, she said. He considered that. I know, but it's like if I tell you it's hard, then I have to think about how hard it is. And I'd rather draw. She looked at him. That's actually very smart. I know, he said without any arrogance, just acknowledgement, and went back to drawing the skeleton of Victor Hayes's motorcycle. Outside on the street, the ramp sat solid and new and well-made in the late afternoon light. And somewhere in the county, in offices where money usually made problems disappear, a new kind of problem was developing, one that money had already tried to stop and failed, one that was growing precisely because the attempt to stop it had created more witnesses, more documentation, more people who now had a reason to pay attention. And in Gary Reeves's workshop, 2 towns over, a custom wheelchair was taking shape in the exact shade of blue that exists in the sky when there are no clouds. Bright blue, not dark. Exactly right. It was coming. Teresa Vanek's second article ran on a Thursday morning. Claire knew it was live because her phone started buzzing at 6:42 a.m. and didn't stop. Not calls, texts from numbers she recognized and numbers she didn't. From people at the diner, from neighbors, from a woman she'd worked with 3 jobs ago who she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. All of them saying some version of the same thing. I saw the article. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and read the article herself before she responded to any of them. Teresa had done exactly what she said she would do. Every claim sourced, every word legally reviewed. The former Caldwell employee was quoted without a name, identified only as someone with direct knowledge of the company's financial records. The previous settlement was described in careful, specific terms. A minor child, a different town, 3 years prior, a payment made under a confidentiality agreement following an incident involving Marcus Caldwell. The article did not say Marcus had done this before. It said a settlement existed, and it asked the question that settlement raised. It asked who else might have stayed silent because silence had been purchased. And then it asked the question that no amount of legal language could deflect. If a family, their son had caused harm once and chose to pay for silence rather than accountability, what did that make them responsible for when he caused harm again? Richard Caldwell had no comment. Franklin Doyle's office issued a statement saying the firm did not respond to speculative journalism. Neither statement was going to be enough, and everyone reading them knew it. By 9 a.m., the article had been shared over 4,000 times. By 11, it had been picked up by 2 state-level outlets. By noon, a television reporter from the regional CBS affiliate was parked outside the Route 9 roadside and asking Claire's manager if she was working that day. She was not. She had taken a personal day, first personal day she'd taken in 8 months, because she'd known, in the way you know things when you've been paying close attention, that today was not going to be a quiet day. Victor called at 9:30. You've seen it, he said. I've seen it. How are you? She thought about that honestly. I feel like I'm standing in the middle of a river, she said, like the current is moving around me and I'm trying to stay on my feet and I don't know which direction it's going. That's about right, Victor said. The difference now is you're not standing in it alone. Victor, she paused. The other family, the family from 3 years ago who signed the confidentiality agreement. Do you know who they are? A pause. Why? Because they were where I was, and they were alone, and they signed a piece of paper and stayed silent, and I don't blame them. I would never blame them. But I keep thinking about what that cost them. She stopped. I keep thinking that if someone had been standing in the street outside their house, the way you were outside mine, maybe things would have gone differently. Silence on the line for a moment. You're thinking about reaching out to them, Victor said. I don't know if I can. I don't know who they are. Leave that with me, Victor said. She almost asked what that meant. She'd learned by now that when Victor said leave that with me, it meant something was already in motion, and the less she asked about the mechanism, the better she'd sleep. Okay, she said. She was sitting with Noah at the kitchen table. He was working on the third motorcycle drawing in a series, this one with more detail around the engine, having spent an hour on the phone with Rebecca the previous evening, getting the specifications right, when the second major thing happened. Her doorbell rang. She opened the door and found a woman standing on the new porch ramp. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, a child beside her in a wheelchair. A girl, maybe 8 years old, with her mother's eyes and a stuffed rabbit in her lap. The woman looked at Claire. My name is Patricia Odom, she said. Her voice was steady in the specific way of someone who had rehearsed being steady before arriving at this door. 3 years ago, my daughter Simone was at a county park. Marcus Caldwell was there. There was an incident. She stopped, started again. We signed papers. We weren't supposed to talk about it. Claire stood very still. You broke your agreement, she said, by coming here. Yes. Patricia looked at her directly. I've been watching the news for 2 days. I've been watching what you did and what you didn't do and what it cost you. She paused. And last night my daughter asked me why that boy in the story had people standing outside his house and nobody had stood outside ours. The air between them was very quiet. What did you say to her? Claire asked. Patricia's voice didn't break, but something around her eyes shifted. I didn't have a good answer. Claire stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Claire had held the broken wheelchair 3 nights ago. Patricia, Simone, who had immediately noticed Noah's sketchbook and asked if he was an artist. To which Noah had said yes with a seriousness that made both mothers exchange the small, involuntary smile that parents share when their children are unexpectedly formal. Simone's rabbit sat propped against the sugar bowl. Patricia told her story with the careful precision of someone who had told it inside her own head so many times it had worn itself smooth. 3 years ago, Simone, who had been using a wheelchair since an illness at age 4, had been at Clover County Park on a Saturday afternoon. Marcus Caldwell had been there with friends. There had been comments, then escalation, then a physical altercation with Simone's equipment. Her chair hadn't been destroyed. The damage was less dramatic. But Simone had been knocked to the ground. She'd been sitting on the grass alone when Patricia found her, 20 minutes after it happened, because she hadn't had her phone and couldn't call for help. When Patricia reported it, the Caldwell family had moved within 48 hours. Not with apology, with lawyers. The settlement they offered covered the equipment damage and a year's worth of therapy. The confidentiality clause was comprehensive. We needed the money, Patricia said. Simone's medical bills. We were already behind. I told myself it was pragmatic. I told myself it was the right choice. She looked at the table. I've told myself a lot of things. You made the decision you had to make, Claire said. Maybe, Patricia looked up. But here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Marcus Caldwell walked away from what he did to my daughter, and he did the same thing again. To your son. She paused. My silence didn't protect us. It just protected him. The kitchen was very quiet. Noah, who had been drawing with his head down, looked up. He looked at Simone, then he looked at his mother with those eyes that processed more than they reported. That's the boy from the park, he said. Claire looked at him. His name was Marcus, yes. Noah was quiet for a moment, then he turned to Simone. Did you get your chair fixed? He said. His voice was matter-of-fact, practical, one equipment user to another. Simone looked at him. Yeah, eventually. Mine's being built right now. It's going to be blue. What kind of blue? Sky blue, no clouds. Simone considered this. I like purple, she said. Mine's purple. Purple's good too, Noah said, and went back to his drawing. Claire looked at Patricia across the table. I need to call someone, Claire said. She called Victor. He answered and she said, I have someone here you need to know about. She looked at Patricia. She's brave, and she has something to say. Victor's response was immediate and unsurprised, which told Claire this was at least partly something he had expected or hoped for. Can she meet with Teresa Vanek? Claire looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at her daughter, at Simone drawing something in Noah's sketchbook with a borrowed pencil, at the table that had held so many hard moments in Claire's kitchen. Then she looked back at Claire. Yes, she said. The meeting happened that afternoon. Victor made the calls. Teresa came within 2 hours. The three of them sat in a conference room at the Gazette offices while Simone and Noah waited in the lobby and, according to later reports from both children, talked about their wheelchairs, their drawings, and whether rabbits were smarter than people generally gave them credit for. Patricia gave her account on record, with Teresa's legal team on standby, with a document prepared to address the confidentiality agreement in the specific way that allowed her to speak about events that had been sealed. Because confidentiality agreements don't prevent disclosure when disclosure is necessary to prevent ongoing harm, and Patricia's attorney had confirmed that the previous morning. She had called an attorney the previous morning. She had been preparing for this. Teresa published the follow-up article in a special update at 8 o'clock that evening. The headline was 7 words: a second child, a second covered incident. By 10 p.m. the story had left the county. By 11 it was on the Associated Press wire. By midnight Richard Caldwell's name was appearing in the search algorithms of people who had never heard of Ridgway County. Claire was awake for most of it, not tracking the spread. She'd stopped reading the comment sections after the first hour because some of them were wonderful and some of them were something else entirely, and she didn't have the bandwidth for either. She sat in the kitchen with Rebecca, who had shown up at 7:30 with food from a restaurant that was not the Route 9 roadside, which Claire appreciated specifically because it meant she didn't have to perform any professional gratitude. They ate. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Caldwell or lawyers or articles. Rebecca told a story about a club trip to New Mexico that involved a wrong turn, a thunderstorm, and a roadside diner run by a man who claimed to have been a Navy SEAL and definitely had not been a Navy SEAL. Claire laughed more than she had in a week, real laughing, the kind that means your body has decided for a moment that things are okay enough to laugh. At 10:15, Claire's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Whitmore? A voice she didn't recognize. Male. Older. The particular voice of a man who had not personally made a phone call like this in a very long time. This is Richard Caldwell. Rebecca looked at Claire from across the table. Claire held up one finger. Then she got up, went to the counter, and hit record. Mr. Caldwell, she said, I'm calling without my attorneys. A pause, long enough to be meaningful. I'm calling because I think it's past time that I talk to you myself. I agree, Claire said. Her voice was very calm. It's past time. Another pause. What my son did to your son was wrong. What he did 3 years ago to the Odom girl was wrong. And he stopped. She could hear something in the stop. Not legal caution. Something harder than that. Something that sounded, for the first time in all of this, like a man who was not managing a situation, but experiencing one. I told myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. I told myself boys make mistakes. I told myself the settlements I called them resolutions. I said we'd resolve the situations. He exhaled. I was protecting him. That's what I told myself. But protecting him from consequences isn't the same as teaching him there should be any. Claire stood in her kitchen listening to Richard Caldwell's voice crack around the edges. She did not feel sympathy exactly. She wasn't at that part yet, but she felt something shift in the picture she'd carried of him. The man who bought rooms, who sent lawyers at 9 p.m., who had his name on buildings, that man was still real. But so was this one, the father who had looked at his son and chosen the wrong kind of love, the kind that removes obstacles instead of building character, and was now, possibly for the first time, understanding what that had cost. Mr. Caldwell, she said, what do you want? I want to make this right. Another pause. I note that probably sounds, after everything, I know how that sounds. But I mean it. I want to know what right looks like to you, not to my lawyers. To you. Claire looked at Rebecca across the kitchen. Rebecca was watching her with that steady, unhurried attention. She thought about what she'd told Rebecca a week ago, about the letter that arrived with no apology, about Marcus and what she actually wanted for him. Here's what right looks like, Claire said. Your son stands in front of Noah and Patricia Odom's daughter, and he apologizes. Not a prepared statement, not something written by Franklin Doyle. He stands there and he says what he did, and he says he's sorry, and he means it enough that I can hear it in his voice. She paused. Then he spends a real amount of time, I mean months, I mean consistent time, working with organizations that serve people with disabilities. Not as a photo opportunity, not supervised in a way that looks good. Real work. The kind where he actually has to be present with people and understand what he did. Silence. He's 16, Richard said quietly. Not as a defense. It didn't sound like a defense. It sounded like a man measuring something. I know, Claire said. That means he still has time to be different. That's actually why I'm asking for this instead of asking for something else. She paused. You understand what I mean by something else. She meant prison. She meant juvenile criminal records. She meant the full weight of what the footage and the witnesses and the second incident made possible if she pushed in that direction. Caldwell understood. Yes, he said, I understand. Good, she exhaled. And the financial piece, whatever your lawyers put in that letter, I want it structured so that it goes to organizations. Not to me personally, except for Noah's direct medical costs. Set up a fund for families who can't afford adaptive equipment. Do it publicly. Put your name on it if you want. I don't care about that. But make it real and make it permanent. The silence this time was longer. Ms. Whitmore, Richard Caldwell said. Why? Why what? Why not just take what you could take? You could destroy us. The footage, the Odom case, everything that's out now. You could have every network in the country on this by morning. You could make Marcus's life. He stopped. You could make it very bad for a long time for all of us. She thought about Noah at the kitchen table drawing motorcycles. She thought about Simone and her purple wheelchair and her stuffed rabbit and her mother who had stayed silent for 3 years because she'd needed the money and then had sat with that silence every day since. I could, Claire said, but my son doesn't need your son's life to be destroyed. He needs his own life to be whole. A pause. And honestly, your son destroying someone else's life didn't fix him the first time. It's not going to fix him now. Another long silence. When Richard Caldwell spoke again, his voice was different. Not softer exactly. More stripped down, less manufactured. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and I want you to be honest with me. I'll try. Do you think he can be different? Marcus, do you actually believe that? Claire looked at the ceiling. She thought about that honestly, the way she tried to think about hard things. I think 16 is young enough that it's possible, she said. I don't know if it's certain. That depends on whether anyone around him is willing to make it hard on him instead of easy. That's always been the job, and I don't think it got done. She paused. But yes, I think it's possible. Caldwell said, okay, just that, just okay. They spoke for another 15 minutes, working out the broad shape of things. No lawyers on the call, no formal language. Just two parents in two kitchens in the same county, building something that might, if everyone did their part, be worth more than what had been destroyed. When the call ended, Claire set her phone on the counter. Rebecca was looking at her with an expression that was hard to describe and easy to feel. That was Richard Caldwell, Claire said. I gathered. He called without lawyers. I heard. She stopped. I don't know if it was real. I don't know if he means it. I have no way of knowing that yet. No, Rebecca, you won't know for a while. But something felt different. Rebecca nodded. Sometimes it is, she said. Sometimes a person hits the bottom of what they've been doing, and they look up and they decide. And sometimes that decision is real. She paused. And sometimes it's not. The only thing that tells you which one is time. I know. Claire sat back down at the table. I know. They sat together in the kitchen without needing to fill the silence. Then Rebecca said, You know what Victor told me last night? What? He said, and this is a direct quote, so you're getting it in his exact voice. He said, that woman is going to be just fine, with a period at the end, like it was already settled. Claire looked at her. And what did you say? I said I knew that the morning she told me about the broken wheelchair. Anyone who gets through what she gets through every day and still makes the coffee perfect is going to be just fine. Rebecca picked up her fork. Now eat. The food is getting cold, and you haven't had a real meal in 3 days. Claire ate. The next morning, the third twist arrived. It came in a form nobody had anticipated, which was the nature of third twists. The first two had been loud. The article, the second incident. This one was quiet. Gary Reeves called. That was the wheelchair builder, the man Victor had called the best in the state, the man who had been working on the sky blue wheelchair with gravel. Capable wheels since the morning hundreds of people stood on Maple Court. Claire had spoken with him once briefly the week before, a no-nonsense conversation about specifications and timeline. He had the manner of a craftsman, economical with words, precise with details, clearly someone for whom the work said more than anything he could say about it. Ms. Whitmore, he said, chair's nearly done. I wanted to call because I've had some visitors this week. Visitors? Other builders, he said. 3 different shops reached out after the story ran. They saw what I was doing and they wanted to be part of it somehow. A pause. They each asked if they could contribute something, equipment, parts, customizations. Another pause, and she could hear something in it, the particular hesitation of a craftsman trying to translate an emotion into a specification. This wheelchair is going to be one of the best adaptive chairs built in this state in years. I just wanted you to know that. It's not just me anymore. There are 4 builders' names going on it. Claire sat with the phone in her hand. Mr. Reeves, she said. Yeah. Does Noah need to know that there were 4 of you? Gary was quiet for a moment. I'd want my kid to know, he said, but that's your call. She told Noah that evening. He was in his room. The motorcycle series had expanded. He was now on the 7th drawing. And he looked up when she told him. 4 builders? He said. 4. He thought about this. So 4 people who didn't know me at all made my chair. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he went back to his drawing and said, without looking up, I'm going to put all their names on the airplane too, on the other side. So there are names on both sides. Claire sat on the edge of his bed. She watched him draw for a while without saying anything. The day the chair arrived was a Thursday, 3 weeks and 2 days after the afternoon at Ridgeway Park. It arrived in Gary Reeves's truck. He brought it himself, which nobody had asked him to do. And when he lifted it out and set it on the new ramp at the front of the house, Noah was already at the door. The chair was extraordinary, not flashy. That wasn't the right word. Built was the right word. It was built the way things are built when someone cares about every millimeter. The frame was lighter than the old one, but visibly stronger. The wheels were what Gary called all-terrain capable, meaning gravel, meaning uneven ground, meaning the park path, meaning everywhere. And the color was exactly what Noah had asked for. Sky blue. No clouds, the bright kind. Victor was there. Rebecca was there. Daniel Harper, the construction worker who had carried Noah home, was there because Claire had tracked him down and called him personally and told him he needed to be. Gary Reeves stood beside his truck with the particular proud stillness of a man watching his work enter the world. And along the street, not as many as that first morning, but still 30, 40 people. Bikes parked along the curb, vests, quiet presence. Noah came down the new ramp in the loaner chair and stopped in front of the new one. He looked at it for a long time. Can I? He said to Gary. It's yours, Gary said. The transfer took about 30 seconds. Noah had been doing transfers his whole life, and he was efficient and practiced and completely without self-consciousness about it. He settled into the new chair and sat there for a moment, just feeling the fit of it, the way it held him, the way the armrest sat, the specific angle of the footrest that Gary had adjusted precisely to his measurements. He gripped the wheels, pushed forward, and the chair moved the way things move when they are built right, without friction, without wobble, exactly responsive to the hands that drove it. He went down the ramp to the sidewalk and along the front of the house and around and back, and his face went through something during those 40 seconds that Claire would not be able to accurately describe for a long time after. It was not joy exactly. Or it wasn't only joy, it was something more fundamental than joy. The expression of a person who has had their freedom returned to them in his feeling for the first time the specific relief of being able to move through the world the way they were meant to move. He came back to the ramp and stopped. He looked at Victor. It's perfect, he said. Victor nodded once, the way men nod when words would be too small for what they're covering. Thank Gary, Victor said. He built it. Noah looked at Gary. Thank you, he said with the same seriousness with which he'd shaken Daniel Harper's hand 7 weeks ago in his pajamas in the front doorway. Gary looked at the chair, then at Noah. Then he said gruffly and without ceremony, You take care of it." "I will," Noah said. Then he looked at the gathered people on the street, at Rebecca, at Daniel Harper, who was standing near the back of the group with his big construction worker hands at his sides and an expression that said he was very glad he'd stopped that afternoon at the park. At Victor, who was looking back at him steadily. "I want to draw all of you," Noah said. "Not just the motorcycles, all of you. I want to draw this," he gestured broadly, at the street, at the people, at whatever this whole thing was. "I want to draw what this looks like." And Claire, standing on the porch of her house with its new ramp and its flower boxes that were still trying their best despite the summer, thought, yes, someone should. She was crying again, the honest kind, the kind that arrives before you decide to cry. She didn't wipe her face this time. She just let it happen, because after 7 weeks of carrying everything tight and controlled and managed, she had earned this. She had earned the ability to stand on her own porch and cry in front of people and not apologize for it. Rebecca appeared beside her, didn't say anything, just stood there. On the street, Noah was explaining to Victor that he planned the drawing to be large format. He'd looked up how to do large format artwork in one of his library books, and that he'd need a better pencil than the ones he currently had, which were good but maybe not professional grade. Victor pulled out his phone. "What kind?" he said. "Professional drawing pencils," Noah said. "I'll send you the specific ones." "You can send me a text?" Rebecca showed me how to text on her phone. "I don't have my own, but Mom said maybe when I'm 12. Victor looked at Claire. She shrugged. He looked back at Noah. "Send me the list," he said. The pencils arrived the next day. Professional grade. A full set, with a note that said, in Victor's plain, unhurried handwriting, "For whatever comes next." Noah read the note 3 times. Then he put it carefully in the drawer, where he kept the things that mattered most. The aviation photograph he'd cut out of the library book, a smooth stone he'd found at a creek 2 summers ago, a folded note from his kindergarten teacher that said, "You have a good heart, Noah Whitmore." He placed Victor's note beside them. Then he opened his sketchbook to a fresh page, and he began. The drawing took Noah 6 weeks. Not because he was slow. Anyone who had watched him work knew that he was deliberate the way precise people are deliberate. Every line placed with intention. Nothing wasted, nothing approximate. He worked on it in the mornings before school, and in the evenings after dinner, and on Saturday afternoons when the light came through his bedroom window at the angle he said was best, which Claire had learned not to question because he was always right about things like that. I didn't show anyone while he worked, not Claire, not Rebecca, not Victor. When Claire asked how it was coming, he said fine. When Rebecca texted to ask the same thing. He had his own phone now, 3 months before his 12th birthday, a concession Claire had made on the grounds that the last 2 months had demonstrated fairly conclusively that the ability to contact people in an emergency was not a luxury item. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji which told her nothing, and he knew it. The only person he showed partway through was Simone Odom. Simone had become a fixture in the way that sometimes happens between children who have been through something parallel. Not the same, but close enough to rhyme. She and Noah texted each other about their wheelchairs and their drawings, and whether the county library had better aviation books than the one in her town, which was a debate that had apparently been ongoing for 6 weeks without resolution. Her mother, Patricia, called Claire sometimes, not about anything specific, just to talk. The particular conversation that happens between 2 women who have been through something hard together and come out the other side still standing. Patricia had given her testimony to the county prosecutor's office 4 weeks after the second article ran. She had not been required to. Her attorney had confirmed that her confidentiality agreement had a carve-out for legal proceedings, but nobody had forced her hand. She had walked into that office on a Tuesday morning wearing the same careful steadiness she'd worn to Claire's door, and she had told the whole story on the record for the first time. Simone had asked her that morning before she left, "Are you scared?" Patricia had looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "but I'm going anyway." Simone had thought about that. "Okay," she said, "me too." And she had gone with her, sat in the waiting room with her rabbit and her purple wheelchair and her mother's phone, on which she played a word game without complaint for an hour and 40 minutes. The prosecutor's office moved quickly once they had both accounts and the footage, and the witness statements, and the audio recording of Franklin Doyle's calls. which had been submitted to the investigation through the appropriate legal channels. They move the way institutions move when the cost of moving slowly has become higher than the cost of acting, with a kind of institutional momentum that had been absent in the first days and was now suddenly very present. Marcus Caldwell and his two friends were charged as juveniles. The charges covered destruction of property, harassment, and because of the prior incident, because of the pattern, a charge related to targeting individuals based on disability status, which existed in the state code and had not, until now, been applied in this county. Franklin Doyle's firm released a statement. Richard Caldwell released a statement. Marcus Caldwell's statement was 3 sentences long and did not come from a lawyer. It came from Marcus himself in a letter that was shared with Claire before it was shared with anyone else, which was Richard Caldwell honoring the one condition she had asked for in their late-night kitchen phone call. She read it at the kitchen table. The handwriting was uneven in the way of someone writing something for the first time without knowing how, not a rough draft. The actual letter, the final version, and still uneven, which meant the unevenness was real. It said, "I broke your son's wheelchair on purpose. I thought it was funny, and I didn't think about what it meant. I didn't think about him at all, which is the worst part. I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm sorry it took this long, and I'm sorry I made it harder for your family by lying about it afterward. I know sorry doesn't fix anything. I'm going to try to do things that are more useful than sorry." Claire read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with the things that mattered most, beside Noah's aviation photograph, beside the smooth creek stone, beside the kindergarten teacher's note, beside Victor's, for whatever comes next. She did not tell Noah about the letter yet. She waited until he asked. He asked 3 days later at dinner, with the particular timing he had for questions he'd been holding, always waiting until the moment felt right, which was another thing Claire had learned not to question. "Did Marcus Caldwell say sorry?" he said. She looked at him. "Yes." "Was it real?" She thought about the uneven handwriting, the 3 sentences with no legal language, the part that said, which is the worst part, as if he had identified the specific thing that made it bad and was willing to name it. "I think it might be," she said. Noah nodded. He ate for a while. Then, "Is he going to do the program, the disability awareness thing?" "He started already. Your condition was part of the court agreement." "My condition wasn't a condition," Noah said in the tone of someone making a factual correction. "My legs are just how I am." Claire looked at him. "You're right. I meant the agreement with the court required him to do it." "How long?" 6 months minimum. Real work. The organization that runs it doesn't do photo opportunities." Noah considered this. "That's actually a long time," he said. Not sympathetically, just factually. Processing the length of it. "Yes," Claire said, "it is." He nodded again, finished his dinner. Then he said, "I think I want to meet him eventually, not now, but eventually." Claire put her fork down. "Why?" she said. He looked at the table for a moment, the way he looked at a drawing when he was figuring out the next line. "Because I want to know if he's actually different," he said. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life just wondering." "That seems worse than knowing." He looked up. "Is that weird?" "No," Claire said. "It's not weird at all." "Okay." He picked up his fork. "Not now, though." "Not now," she agreed. The drawing was finished on a Saturday morning in late October. 8 weeks after Noah had started it. Claire knew it was done because he came to find her. She was in the kitchen reading and said simply, "It's done." She followed him to his room. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. He had done it on 3 sheets of paper taped together to make one large surface. The large format technique he'd researched, executed with the professional pencils Victor had sent. It was in graphite, not color, which was not what she'd expected. But she understood immediately why he'd chosen that. Color would have been warmer. Graphite was more honest. It captured things the way they actually were rather than the way they felt in memory. The drawing was Maple Court on the morning the engines came. He had drawn it from memory and from a photograph Rebecca had taken on her phone that morning, which she'd sent to Claire, and Claire had quietly forwarded to Noah without telling him why. He had the street right. He had the ramp right. He had the people right. Dozens of them, rendered with the kind of patient detail that meant he had spent real time on each face, each vest, each bike. Some she recognized immediately. Victor, unmistakable in his stillness, Rebecca, her silver blonde hair and her expression that was always doing more than it showed. Daniel Harper at the edge of the frame, big and quiet, exactly where he'd stood that day. And in the center of the drawing, on the porch, looking out at all of them, a woman with her hand raised slightly, not waving, not gesturing, just a hand lifted in the instinctive response to being seen. And beside her, in a wheelchair that was not yet the blue chair but the loner, the temporary one, a boy looking at the street with his chin up. Claire looked at the drawing for a long time. "Noah," she said. "Yeah." She couldn't finish the sentence. She tried twice and didn't get there. "I know," he said quietly. "That's kind of why I made it." She reached out and squeezed his shoulder once. He put his hand over hers for a moment. Then they both looked at the drawing in silence. Standing there in his room on a Saturday morning, with the October light coming through the window at the angle he said was best. Victor cried when he saw it. I didn't know that Claire saw him. She had brought the drawing to the clubhouse herself. Noah had asked if they could deliver it in person, and she had called Victor and Rebecca, and it had been arranged without ceremony, which was how Victor preferred most things to be arranged. When she unrolled it on the table in the main room of the clubhouse, Victor looked at it for a while without speaking. Several other members drifted in as word moved through the building and gathered around the table. Nobody spoke much. People looked. And then Claire glanced at Victor, and he was standing with one hand on the edge of the table and his face turned slightly away from the group. And she saw his jaw working. And she understood what she was seeing and looked away because it wasn't hers to witness. She looked away, and he had a moment. And then he said, in a voice that was exactly as steady as his voice always was, "This belongs on the wall." And it went on the wall. Not in a back hallway, not in a storage room, on the main wall of the main room at eye level where anyone who came through the door would see it. Someone found a frame that week, a proper frame, glass front, the kind that meant the thing inside was understood to be permanent. Victor hung it himself on a Sunday afternoon, leveling it with the particular care of a man who understood that some things should be done exactly right. Beneath the frame, on a small plaque that Rebecca had ordered without telling anyone until it arrived, were the words Noah had chosen when Victor asked him what he wanted it to say. Noah had thought about it for a full day. He'd rejected 3 options before he landed on the one he wanted. It was 7 words. Family shows up when the world walks away. The plaque went up on a Tuesday, the same day of the week as the afternoon at the park. Nobody planned that, or if Victor planned it, he never said so. But Claire noticed, and she thought it was right. She thought making something permanent on the same day of the week that something was broken was a good way of saying, this is what we do with broken things. We don't pretend they weren't broken. We build something better in the same space. The juvenile court proceedings concluded in November. The judge, a woman named Harriet Vance, who had been on the Ridgeway County bench for 17 years and had developed over those years a precise and unsentimental understanding of what accountability actually required, handed down a decision that took 40 minutes to read into the record. Marcus Caldwell received 18 months of community service, split between the Disability Advocacy Organization and a separate program working with younger children who had physical limitations. He was required to complete a structured curriculum on disability rights and history. He was required to write monthly reflective reports reviewed by the court for the duration of his community service. He was not permitted to reduce or renegotiate any of these terms. The charges against the other 2 boys were handled separately and similarly. Additionally, and this was the part that landed differently than the rest, the part that made the courtroom shift in a particular way, Judge Vance ordered Richard Caldwell to appear personally at the next session of the county commissioners meeting and make a public statement acknowledging what his son had done and what he, Richard, had done 3 years prior in purchasing the Odom family's silence. Richard Caldwell's lawyers objected. Judge Vance looked at them over her glasses and said, "Overruled. The community you've operated in deserves to hear from you directly. That's what public accountability looks like." He did it. 3 weeks later, Richard Caldwell stood at the county commissioner's podium, the same podium where he had stood to accept a community leadership award 4 years earlier. And he read a statement that had not been written by Franklin Doyle. Claire knew it hadn't been written by Franklin Doyle because she'd been told so in advance. And because when she read it in the transcript afterward, she recognized the particular quality of language that belongs to a person writing in their own voice under real pressure. Imperfect, unsmooth, real. He named both incidents. He named what Marcus had done to Simone Odom 3 years ago and what his firm had done to keep it quiet. He named what Marcus had done to Noah Whitmore and what he himself had done in the first days. The lawyer calls, the pressure, the offer of money as a substitute for accountability. He said the word wrong 7 times, which Teresa Vanek counted and noted in the article she published the following morning. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not say he hoped people would understand. He said he understood why they might not, and then he sat down. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then someone in the back started clapping, not enthusiastically, not the kind of applause that says, well done, the kind that says that was necessary and you did it. Other people joined, not a standing ovation, something more complicated and more honest than that. Claire was not in the room. She had chosen not to attend, and she did not second-guess that choice. She was at the Route 9 roadside on her regular shift, pouring coffee, knowing the meeting was happening and choosing to be doing the ordinary thing that kept her life going rather than watching the extraordinary reckoning of a man who had hurt her family and was now, belatedly, paying a real price. She found out how it went from Rebecca, who had been there and who texted her at 2:47 p.m. He did it, all of it. Right. Claire read the text in the back of the diner during her break. She stood there for a moment. Then she went back out front and refilled the old man's coffee at the counter, the one who read the sports section every morning and was on his 3rd cup by the time most people arrived. And she said, "How's the team looking this week?" He launched into an analysis. She listened and responded and moved through the rest of her shift with the particular competence that her body knew even when her mind was somewhere else. The fund was established in January. Richard Caldwell had agreed in that late-night phone call in Claire's kitchen to set up a fund for families who couldn't afford adaptive equipment. He'd agreed to make it public, to make it real, to make it permanent, and he had done it, which was the part that had been impossible to predict from a phone call and which Claire had spent 3 months holding cautiously, not letting herself count on until it was real. It was real. The Ridgeway Adaptive Equipment Fund opened its applications in January with an initial endowment of $400,000. It was not named after the Caldwells. At Claire's suggestion, which Richard had accepted without argument, it was named after nobody. It was called simply the Ridgeway Fund. The applications were anonymous. The decisions were made by a board that included 2 disability advocacy organization representatives, 1 medical professional, and 2 parents of children with disabilities. Patricia Odom was one of the board members. The day Patricia called to tell her she'd been asked to serve, she cried for the first time since coming to Claire's door. The first time, she said, since everything had started moving, and she'd had to stay so focused on moving with it that there hadn't been space for crying. She cried, and then she laughed, and then she said, "Simone is going to lose her mind when I tell her." "How is Simone?" Claire asked. She finished her rabbit drawing series. She started a new one. She's drawing every wheelchair she can find pictures of. Historical ones, modern ones, custom ones. She says it's going to be a reference book eventually. "Noah says hi," Claire said. "He's been working on something new. He won't tell me what it is yet." "They're both impossible," Patricia said. "In the best way." "Yes," Claire agreed, "completely impossible." In February, Claire got a call from a woman named Sandra Cho, who ran a nonprofit called Bridges and Wheels that provided adaptive equipment and support services to low-income families across 3 counties. Sandra had read the articles. She'd followed the case. She called because she was looking for someone to join her board and also to help develop a family liaison program, something that connected families navigating the adaptive equipment system with someone who had been through it and come out knowing what they knew. "I'm a waitress," Claire said on the phone, not as a deflection, just as a fact that seemed relevant. "I know," Sandra said. "And you managed a media campaign, a legal situation, a hostile corporate family, and a community organizing effort simultaneously while working full-time and raising a child with complex needs. I could use someone who can do all of that. The waitress part just means you're also good with people." Claire was quiet for a moment. "It would be part-time," Sandra said, "to start, and we can work around your schedule." "Can I think about it?" Claire said. "Of course." She thought about it for 4 days. She talked to Rebecca about it. Rebecca, who said without a hesitation, "Yes, obviously, stop thinking about it." She talked to Noah about it, because she had made a practice of talking to Noah about decisions that affected their life, and because he was 11 years old and had opinions worth hearing. "Do you want to do it?" he asked. "I think so," she said. "Then do it," he said, like it was simple, like the answer had been in the question all along. She called Sandra Cho back on a Thursday morning and said yes. She kept her shifts at the Route 9 roadside. Sandra had been right. The part-time arrangement fit. And she found, in those first weeks of working with families navigating the system she knew so well from the inside, that the thing she brought to it wasn't expertise exactly. It was recognition. She could look at a parent sitting across from her in an intake meeting and recognize, in the set of their shoulders, in the particular way they answered questions too carefully, the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying everything alone. And she would say, "Tell me what happened. Not are you okay? Not how can I help? Just tell me what happened," which was the thing Rebecca had said to her across a diner booth on the morning that changed everything. And she understood now, the way you understand things that you've only borrowed from someone else until you've needed them yourself, why those words were the right ones. She understood because she had been on the receiving end of them, and because she remembered with exact clarity what it felt like when someone asked that question and actually waited for the answer. Spring came the way springs do in that part of the country, slowly, then suddenly. One week everything was still gray and cold, and then one morning you stepped outside and the air had changed, and you knew. Noah asked in April if they could go back to the park. It was a Saturday morning. Claire had her coffee. He had his sketchbook and his new professional pencils in his blue chair with the gravel-capable wheels, and he looked at her across the kitchen table with an expression that was ready. "The north end," she said. "By the oak trees?" "That's the best spot," he said. "I know it is." She called Rebecca on the way out the door, not for any specific reason, just to say they were going to the park. Rebecca said, "Good." And that was all she said, because Rebecca understood that some moments didn't require commentary. They drove to the park. They walked in. Claire walked, Noah rolled. The gravel path handling exactly as promised, smooth and responsive. And they went to the north end near the old oak trees where it was quiet and the light was good. Noah opened his sketchbook. Claire sat on the bench nearby and read her book. They stayed for 2 hours. It was exactly, precisely, an ordinary Saturday morning at the park, which was the whole point. On the way home, Noah said, "I want to come back next week." "We can do that," Claire said, "and the week after." "Yes." "I want it to just be a normal thing again," he said. "Not a big deal, just the park." "Okay," she said, "we'll make it just the park." He looked out the window. "It already feels more like that than I thought it would." "How does it feel?" "Like mine again," he said. "Like I got it back." She kept her eyes on the road. "You did get it back," she said. "That's exactly what happened." The clubhouse photograph, Noah's drawing in its proper frame on the main wall, became the kind of thing that people referenced without planning to. Members of the chapter who had been at Maple Court that morning would sometimes stop in front of it before leaving on a ride or after returning from one. Not ceremonially, not with speeches, just stopping for a moment the way you stop in front of something that reminds you why you do what you do. New members who hadn't been there would ask about it and be told the story, and the story was always told the same way, plainly without drama, starting with Rebecca at a diner and ending with Noah asking for gravel wheels, because that was how Victor told it the first time someone asked, and his version became the definitive one because it was the most accurate and because accuracy was how Victor showed respect. The plaque with Noah's 7 words stayed exactly where Rebecca had placed it. Family shows up when the world walks away. A year after the incident at Ridgeway Park, Teresa Vanek wrote a follow-up piece. She called it a year later story, which was a form she'd always been good at. The revisit, the accounting, the honest look at what had changed and what hadn't. She asked Claire if she'd be willing to talk. They met at the Route 9 roadside. Same corner booth where Rebecca always sat, which was where Claire had suggested they meet and which Teresa had understood was not accidental. "How are you?" Teresa asked. "I'm really good," Claire said, and she meant it with the specificity that came from having had to say "I'm functioning" not so long ago and knowing the difference. "And Noah?" Claire thought about Noah at the park the previous Saturday, in his blue chair, working on a new drawing. A series now, she understood, of ordinary places that had meant something. The park, the library, the front porch, the kitchen table, places that were his and that he was claiming in graphite because drawing them was how he kept them. Noah is, she stopped, not because she couldn't answer, because the answer was big enough that she wanted to say it right. Noah is exactly who he was going to be, she said. Everything that happened didn't change him. He's still drawing, still asking the exact right questions at the exact wrong moments, still thinking about other people more than they think about him. She paused. I think if anything, he knows more now about what the world can do to you and also what it can do for you, and that's not nothing. Teresa wrote for a moment, then looked up. What about you? What do you know now that you didn't know a year ago? Claire thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about hard things. I knew I was strong, she said. I had to know that. You don't get through what I'd gotten through without knowing it. But I thought being strong meant not needing people. She looked at the booth across from her. The window, the draft, the place where Rebecca sat on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I was wrong about that. Being strong and needing people aren't opposites. They never were. I'd been alone long enough that I'd forgotten. Teresa nodded. Do you have a message? Teresa asked. For other families, people who read this and are in the place you were a year ago. Claire was quiet for a moment. Tell them, she said slowly, that the people who show up might not look like what you expected. They might pull up on motorcycles. They might be someone you've been making coffee for 4 years without knowing who they really were. The help might come from somewhere you never would have guessed. She paused. But it comes. If you let it, if you're honest enough to say, I don't know how to do this, it comes. That's the only thing I know for sure. The article ran on a Tuesday, the same day. Victor read it at the clubhouse, standing up because he'd just come in from a ride still in his jacket, and someone had left the paper open on the table. He read the last part twice. Then he put the paper down and looked at Noah's drawing on the wall. He stood there for a minute. Then he went to make coffee, because that was what you did, and life kept going, and the best tribute to the things that mattered was to keep showing up for them. Noah Whitmore turned 12 in June. His birthday party was at Ridgeway Park, North End, by the oak trees. Rebecca brought food. Victor brought his motorcycle, at Noah's specific request, because Noah was still working on the series and had 3 bikes left to draw, and Victor's was one of them. Daniel Harper came. Claire had made a habit of inviting him to things now because he had carried her son home when there was nothing in it for him, and that was not a thing you let fade from your life. Patricia and Simone drove 40 minutes from their town. Simone brought a drawing she'd made herself, a wheelchair, rendered in careful graphite detail, labeled at the bottom in her neat handwriting, for Noah, blue, no clouds. Noah taped it to the inside cover of his current sketchbook. Gary Reeves sent a card. On the inside he had written, in the economy of a craftsman, how's the chair holding up? No question mark. Statement, because the answer was obvious and he knew it because he'd built it right. Noah wrote back, perfect. Thanks for building it right. Gary replied, that's how we do it. There were no speeches at the birthday party, no ceremonies. No one stood up and said anything formal. They ate and talked, and Noah drew for a while and Simone read, and Daniel Harper told a story about a construction job that had gone badly wrong in a way that ended up being funny, and everyone laughed at the right parts. At the end of the afternoon, when people were gathering their things and saying their goodbyes, Noah pulled out the drawing he'd been working on during the party. He'd been doing it quietly, the way he always worked, present but also in the work, 2 things at once. He held it up. It was the park, the North End, the oak tree, suggested, not described, just lines that said, trees without elaborating. And the people, the specific people, the birthday party people, drawn from where he was sitting so that the perspective was his, what he saw, what his eye had found in the afternoon. In the foreground, 2 wheelchairs, side by side, angled slightly toward each other the way things angle when they're in conversation. I didn't say anything. He just held it up so everyone could see it. Rebecca looked at it for a moment. Then she said, you're going to be extraordinary. I know, Noah said without arrogance, just acknowledgement. Then he rolled the drawing carefully and tucked it into his bag with the professional pencils and headed for the car. Claire watched him go. She stood at the edge of the park where the grass met the path, and she watched her son roll toward the car in his sky blue chair. Gravel capable, built by four people who didn't know him, riding on wheels that had been chosen because a 10-year-old had asked specifically for the right kind, and she felt something that she had been trying to name for months and had never quite gotten there. She got there now. It wasn't relief. It wasn't even happiness, exactly. It was something older than happiness and more durable. It was the feeling of having moved through something real and arrived on the other side still recognizably herself, still the person who worked the early shift and made the coffee exactly right and protected her son with every resource she had, but larger than she'd been before. Not changed, expanded, like something had been added that couldn't be taken back. Victor appeared beside her. He did that, appeared without making noise about it, the way large, calm men sometimes do. "Good party," he said. "Good party," she agreed. They watched Noah reach the car. He transferred with the competence and precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more, and had long since stopped thinking about it as anything other than the way he moved through the world. "He's going to be all right," Victor said. "I was always going to be all right," Claire said. "I just needed people to help me make sure of it." Victor looked at her. Something moved across his face, that thing she'd noticed the first morning, the thing that happened when he felt something he respected. "That's the whole job," he said. "That's all any of us are doing." She nodded. Noah got into the car and looked back through the window at the park, at the north end, the quiet spot, the place that was his again. He gave one small wave, not dramatic, just, "I see you, I'm here." "We're good." Claire raised her hand. Victor raised his. And the boy who had once sat alone in the grass of that park on a Tuesday afternoon that was supposed to be ordinary, with his broken wheelchair scattered around him and his torn drawings drifting on the wind, that boy waved back from the window of his mother's car and smiled the easy, unhurried smile of someone who knew, with the bone-deep certainty that only comes from having it proven, that the world contained people who would show up. Not maybe. Not sometimes. Always, if you were brave enough to let them. The car pulled away from the curb and drove down the street and turned the corner and was gone. And the park went on being the park, and the oak trees went on being the oak trees, and the path that had once been difficult in certain places was now easy in all of them, because that was what happened when you built something right. It held.